Eleanor Whitfield did not scream, not on the first lash, not on the third, not when her blood hit the white Kansas dust and the Sunday congregation watched like it was scripture. She was 26, unmarried, 5 months pregnant, and tied barefoot to the hitching post outside Dry Creek Chapel, while Reverend Tobias Hale called it God's correction. Then Boots crossed the square, slow, steady. Belonging to no one this town had ever seen, and without a single word, a dust-covered cowboy untied the rope and changed everything. If you want to hear how one woman's silence shook an entire town to its foundation, stay with me until the very end. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The leather hit wet. That was the sound Eleanor would remember for the rest of her life. Not the sting, not the tearing. The sound. Wet leather against broken skin, and the gasp of 60 people pretending they didn't enjoy it. July in Dry Creek, Kansas Territory, 1873. The hitching post outside the chapel had held horses for 20 years. Today, it held a woman. Eleanor Whitfield's wrists were bound high above her head with the same rope ranchers used on cattle. Her bare feet pressed into dust so hot it blistered. Her dress, the only good one she owned, had been torn open at the back by Reverend Tobias Hale himself, because he said modesty didn't apply to sinners. 5 lashes. That was the sentence. 5 lashes for carrying a child out of wedlock. 5 lashes because the banker's son, Aldous Pruitt, had left town 3 months ago, and no one wanted to punish a Pruitt. So they punished her instead. The first lash came down at 10:30 in the morning. The second drew blood. The third made 2 women in the front row cover their mouths, not from horror, but from the effort of keeping quiet. Eleanor did not scream. She bit down so hard on her own tongue she tasted iron. Her fingers went white around the rope. Her knees buckled on the 4th lash, and she caught herself, dragged herself back upright by her own wrists, because she would not give them the satisfaction. Not one of them. Not Reverend Hale, standing behind her with his shirt sleeves rolled up, like he was splitting wood. Not Margaret Pruitt, the banker's wife, watching from under her parasol with a face like carved soap. Not the men on the porch of the general store who'd known her since she was a girl working her father's forge, who'd brought their horses to her for shoes and their tools for mending, who now stood with their arms crossed and their eyes down. She would not scream for any of them. The 5th lash never fell. Because Boots stepped into the square. Nobody heard them at first. The crowd was too busy watching her bleed. But Eleanor heard them. Through the ringing in her ears and the hammering of her own pulse, she heard Boots, slow, measured, unhurried, crossing the packed dirt like a man walking through his own front door. She couldn't turn her head far enough to see, but the crowd could, and the crowd went silent. He came from the East Road, a tall man in a long duster so thick with trail dust it had no color left. Hat pulled low, no badge, no visible weapon, just a man walking. Reverend Hale paused with his arm raised. "This is church business, stranger." The man didn't answer. He kept walking. Past the general store. Past the women clutching their Bibles. Past the banker's wife and her parasol. He walked straight to the hitching post, and he reached up with both hands and untied the rope. Not fast, not frantic, just steady, the way you'd free an animal caught in wire. Careful, deliberate, like he'd done this before. The rope fell. Eleanor's arms dropped. Her knees gave out, and she would have hit the ground, but he caught her, one arm under her shoulders, the other bracing her weight. and he held her upright without pulling her close, without pressing against the wounds on her back, without doing anything but keeping her standing. He smelled like horse sweat and wood smoke and long miles. She looked up at his face. Hard jaw, sun-darkened skin, eyes the color of creek water in November, gray, clear, and completely still. He looked down at her. He didn't say a word. "Now you hold on just a moment." Reverend Hale stepped forward, his face going red from the neck up. "That woman is under correction by the authority of—" The stranger turned his head, just turned it, looked at Hale. And whatever Hale saw in those eyes made him stop walking. "I said this is church business." Hale's voice dropped, but it shook at the edges. "You have no authority here." The stranger looked at the whip in Hale's hand, looked at Eleanor's torn dress, looked at the blood on the hitching post. Then he looked back at Hale, still said nothing. But his hand moved to Eleanor's shoulder, gentle, steady, and he turned her toward the east road. You can't take her." Hale's voice cracked upward. "She hasn't finished her penance." The stranger walked. Eleanor walked with him. Her back was on fire. Every step sent pain shooting from her shoulders to her hips. But she walked. Because his hand on her shoulder wasn't pulling her. It was just there, present, solid, telling her she could stop if she needed to. But she didn't have to stop alone. Behind them, the crowd stood like a painting. Nobody followed. They reached the edge of town before Eleanor's legs gave out. She didn't collapse. She just stopped, like a clock winding down. One step, and then nothing. Her body said no more, and she dropped. He caught her again. He lifted her the way you lift something precious and breakable, and he carried her off the main road, down a wagon path overgrown with thistle and buffalo grass, to a cabin set back in a stand of cottonwoods. The cabin was old, weathered gray. The porch sagged on one side, and the shutters were half gone. But the door was solid, and when he kicked it open, the inside was clean. He laid her face down on a narrow bed. She heard him moving, water pouring, the tear of cloth. "This is going to sting," he said. His voice startled her, not because he spoke, but because of how it sounded. Low, rough, damaged, like something had broken it a long time ago, and it had healed wrong. He pressed a wet cloth to her back. She hissed through her teeth. "I know," he said. "Stay still." 2 words. 3 words. That was all he gave her, and each one sounded like it cost him something. She lay there while he cleaned the wounds. 5 stripes across her back, the deepest one still bleeding. He worked without rushing. His hands were rough, working hands, scarred across the knuckles. But they moved carefully, like he understood exactly how much pain he was causing, and was trying to cause as little as possible. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. She heard him wringing out the cloth, heard water splash back into the basin. "Caleb," he said finally. "Caleb Boone." "You from around here?" "Used to be." That was all. She wanted to ask more, where he'd come from, why he'd stopped, how he knew about this cabin. But the pain in her back was making the room tilt, and his hands were gentle, and she hadn't felt gentle in a very long time. She closed her eyes. "Don't fall asleep yet," he said. "Need to check for infection." "I'm not sleeping. I'm deciding whether to trust you." Silence. Then, so quiet she almost missed it. "Fair enough." She didn't trust him. Not that first night. Not when he brought her water in a tin cup. Not when he slept on the porch with his back against the door like a dog guarding a hen house. Not when she woke before dawn and found him already up, coaxing flame into the old iron stove with the patience of a man who'd lived alone for a very long time. "Why'd you do it?" she asked from the doorway. He didn't turn around. "Do what?" "Cut me down." The fire caught. He closed the stove door. "Because they had no right." "That's it? You ride into a town you don't know, cut a woman loose from church punishment, and your reason is they had no right?" He stood, looked at her. "My mother lived in this cabin," he said, 20 years back. She took in women who had nowhere to go. Runaways, widows, girls in trouble." He paused. That damaged voice of his caught on something. "Town drove her out for it. Said she was encouraging sin. When the flood came in '61, she asked for help. Nobody came." Eleanor felt the words land like stones dropped into still water. "She died," Eleanor said. It wasn't the question. "She died." "And my father?" Caleb looked at her sharply. "What about your father?" "You knew him. That's why you came back. That's why you knew where this cabin was." Something shifted in his face. Not surprise, more like the careful rearrangement of a man who hadn't expected to be read that quickly. "Henry Whitfield," Caleb said. "He brought food to my mother when no one else would. Winter of '59. Walked 4 miles in the snow every week. Never told anyone." Eleanor's throat tightened. Her father. Dead 3 years now. The man who'd taught her the forge, who'd put a hammer in her hand when she was 9 and said, "Iron don't care if you're a girl. Hit it right and it obeys." "He was a good man," Caleb said. "He was the best man I ever knew." "Then let me do for his daughter what he did for my mother." She stared at him. His face gave nothing away. No pity, no expectation, no hunger. Just that flat, gray water calm. "I don't need saving," she said. "I know. I'm not offering to save you. I'm offering to stand nearby while you save yourself." 3 days passed. Eleanor's back began to heal, slowly, with a kind of deep ache that rewrites your body's memory of itself. She moved carefully. Caleb changed her bandages twice a day without being asked and without making conversation about it. He was the quietest man she'd ever been around. Not shy, not brooding, just still. Like he'd used up his lifetime supply of words somewhere on the trail and was rationing what was left. On the 3rd morning, she told him she was going back to her forge. He looked at her for a long time. "They won't welcome you," he said. "They never did. I just didn't notice until they tied me to a post." He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before it disappeared. "I'll walk with you," he said. "You don't have to." "I know." They walked into town together just after sunrise. The air was already thick with heat. Cicadas screamed in the cottonwoods. The main street was mostly empty. A few horses at the water trough. Old Dale Crenshaw sweeping the porch of the general store. Dale saw them coming and stopped sweeping. Eleanor didn't look at him. She walked straight to the forge at the end of the street. Her father's forge. Hers now. The building was small. Stone walls, tin roof, wide doors that opened onto the street. The sign above the door still read Whitfield Ironworks in her father's hand-painted letters. She pushed the doors open. Everything was where she'd left it. The anvil, the tongs, the quenching barrel, the coal bin, half full, her leather apron hanging on the nail by the door. She put on the apron. She lit the forge fire, and she went to work. The hammer rang out across Dry Creek like a church bell, steady, rhythmic, unapologetic. Every strike said the same thing. I am still here. Caleb sat on the bench outside. He didn't watch the street. He didn't watch her. He just sat, like a man who'd found the place he was supposed to be and had no intention of explaining himself to anyone. By noon, word had spread. She was back, the Whitfield woman, the sinner. And she'd brought a stranger with her. Tom Briggs from the livery was the first to come by. He stood in the doorway of the forge, hat in his hands, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Eleanor, You need something fixed, Tom?" He blinked. "Well, I got a cracked axle on my... Bring it by tomorrow morning. $1.50. $1.50? Your daddy charged $1. My daddy's dead, and I'm better than he was." Tom Briggs opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Caleb sitting on the bench, looked back at Eleanor. "Tomorrow morning," he said, and left. By evening, 3 more men had come. Not to apologize. Men in Dry Creek didn't apologize. But to bring work. A broken hinge, a bent plow blade, a set of horseshoes. Nobody mentioned the whipping. Nobody mentioned the hitching post. But Eleanor saw how they looked at her, quickly from the corners of their eyes, like men checking the sky for lightning. Good, she thought. Let them be nervous. The trouble came on the 4th day. Eleanor was working the bellows when a shadow fell across the forge door. She looked up and saw Margaret Pruitt standing in the street with 2 other women, Hazel Fenwick, the postmaster's wife, and Clara Briggs, Tom's wife. Margaret didn't come inside. "You should know," Margaret said, her voice carrying that particular quality of a woman who believed volume was the same as righteousness, "that Reverend Hale is calling a meeting tonight about your situation." "My situation," Eleanor repeated. "Your continued defiance." Eleanor set down the tongs. She wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at Margaret Pruitt, the woman whose son had gotten her pregnant and then fled like a dog in a thunderstorm. And she felt something shift inside her chest. Not anger. Something quieter. Something with teeth. "Margaret," Eleanor said, "your son put his hands on me every Saturday night for 4 months. He told me he loved me. He told me we'd marry. And when my belly started showing, he took the morning coach to St. Louis and hasn't sent so much as a letter." Margaret's face went white. "Don't you dare." "I dare because it's true. And everyone on this street knows it's true. The only question is how long they're going to pretend they don't." Clara Briggs looked at the ground. Hazel Fenwick looked at Clara. Margaret Pruitt looked at Eleanor with something that was either hatred or terror. And in that moment, they were the same thing. "The meeting is at 7, Margaret said. "The Reverend expects you to attend." "I'll be at my forge," Eleanor said. "The Reverend can expect whatever he likes." Margaret turned and walked away. The other 2 followed. None of them looked back. Caleb appeared in the doorway. "You heard?" Eleanor asked. He nodded. "They're going to push harder." He nodded again. "Are you going to say anything useful, or are you just going to stand there nodding like a fence post?" Something cracked in his face. A real smile this time. Brief, startled, like sunlight through a gap in storm clouds. "I was going to say you handled that just fine," he said. "I know I did." "I know you know." She looked at him. He looked at her. And something passed between them that neither of them named. Something warm and careful and new, like the first coal catching in a cold forge. "Caleb." "Yeah?" "They're going to come for this place. Not just talk. They're going to try to shut me down." He leaned against the doorframe, crossed his arms. "Then we'd better make sure it's still standing come morning." The meeting happened without her, but she heard about it. Old Dale Crenshaw told her the next morning, standing in the forge with his hat in his hands, speaking in that careful way people speak when they're delivering news they wish they didn't have. "Reverend Hale said you're a stain on the community," Dale said. "Said your refusal to repent is an affront to decent folk." "What else?" Dale shifted his weight. "Said maybe the forge ought to be shut down. Said a woman running a business alone ain't natural, especially a woman in your condition." "Anything else?" "Tom Briggs spoke up for you." Eleanor looked up from the anvil. "Tom did?" "Said you fixed his axle better than your daddy ever could. Said he didn't see how a woman doing honest work was anybody's business but her own." "What happened after that?" "Reverend Hale said Tom was being led astray by feminine wiles." Dale rubbed the back of his neck. "Tom said feminine wiles don't fix axles, and he walked out." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. One man, one voice. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall, and cracks were how light got in. "Dale." "Ma'am?" "Why are you telling me this?" The old man looked at his boots, looked at the forge fire, looked at her. "Because your daddy was my friend," he said. "And I should have stopped them from tying you to that post. I didn't, and I got to live with that." He put his hat back on. "You need anything from the store, you come by. I'll put it on account." He left. Eleanor stood alone in the forge for a long time after that. The fire crackled. The iron cooled on the anvil. Outside, she could hear Caleb's boots on the porch, pacing slowly, back and forth, like a man keeping watch. She picked up her hammer. She brought it down. And the sound that rang out across Dry Creek said what her voice wouldn't. "I'm not going anywhere. You can meet, you can vote, you can preach, but this forge stays lit. And so do I." The hammer rang 3 more times before the first threat arrived. It came not as a voice or a fist, but as a piece of paper nailed to the forge door sometime before dawn. Eleanor found it when she opened up that morning, the nail driven deep into the wood, like whoever put it there wanted it to hurt. 6 words. "Women who defy God burn." She read it twice. Then she pulled the nail out with her bare fingers, walked inside, and fed the paper to the forge fire. Caleb was standing behind her when she turned around. "Saw it," he said. "And?" "And you just burned it, so I reckon there's nothing left to discuss." "There's plenty to discuss. Somebody came to my door in the dark. Somebody's too cowardly to say it to my face in daylight, but brave enough to hammer nails at midnight." Caleb's jaw tightened. She watched the muscle move under his skin, watched his hands curl and uncurl at his sides like a man keeping himself in check. "I'll sleep inside tonight," he said. "You'll sleep on the porch like you've been doing." "Eleanor, I'm not hiding behind a locked door in my own father's forge. That's what they want. They want me scared. They want me small." He looked at her a long time. Then he nodded once and walked out to the bench. She picked up her hammer and went back to work. But her hands were shaking, and it took 4 strikes before the rhythm steadied. She wasn't afraid of the note. She was afraid of what came after it. By mid-morning, the boycott started. It wasn't organized, not officially, but Eleanor noticed. Jed Parker, who'd brought a broken chain link 2 days ago and promised to return for it, didn't show. The widow Henderson, who needed a new fireplace grate, sent her boy to say she'd wait a spell. Even Tom Briggs, who defended her at the meeting, kept to his side of the street when he passed the forge. One by one, the town was pulling away from her like a hand from a hot stove. Eleanor stood at the forge door and watched Dry Creek go about its business as if she didn't exist. "They're shutting me out," she said. Caleb sat on the bench, whittling a piece of pine into nothing. Yep. If no one brings work, I can't earn. If I can't earn, I can't eat. If I can't eat, she put her hand on her belly. 5 months now. The child moved sometimes at night, a flutter like a bird trapped in a jar. It's not just me anymore. Caleb stopped whittling. How much you got saved? Enough for 3 weeks, maybe 4 if I stretch it. And after 4 weeks? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew what after 4 weeks looked like. It looked like surrender. Caleb folded his knife, stood up. Where are you going? She asked. To have a conversation. With who? But he was already walking. Long stride, shoulders square, that dusty duster flapping behind him like a flag nobody wanted to see coming. He walked straight to the livery. Tom Briggs was inside mucking out a stall. He looked up when Caleb's shadow filled the doorway, and his face did something complicated. Guilt and relief fighting for the same space. Boone. Briggs. If you're here about Eleanor, I'm here about a cracked wheel rim I saw on your freight wagon out back. You planning to haul grain to Abilene on a cracked rim? Tom blinked. Well, I was going to. You were going to get it fixed. By the best smith in this territory, who happens to be 100 yards from where you're standing. Tom leaned on his pitchfork. He looked past Caleb to the street, like he was checking if anyone was watching. You know it ain't that simple, Tom said quietly. Hale's got half the town convinced she's a curse. Margaret Pruitt's telling women their milk will sour if they do business with her. I got a wife, Boone. I got kids. You got a cracked wheel rim that's going to split on the Abilene Road and dump your grain in a ditch. That's what you got. Tom chewed his lip, looked at the ground, looked at Caleb. Damn it, Tom said. Bring the wheel. Pay her fare. Clara's going to skin me alive. Clara's going to be a widow if that rim gives out at speed. Tom Briggs stared at him. Then he laughed. A short, sharp, unwilling laugh, like it had been punched out of him. You always this persuasive? I don't talk enough to be persuasive. I just say what's true and let it sit. Tom brought the wheel that afternoon. Eleanor fixed it in 2 hours, charged him $1.75. He paid without arguing, and when he left, he tipped his hat, not to Caleb, but to her. It was a small thing, 1 wheel, 1 customer. But small things are how sieges break. That evening, Eleanor sat on the porch beside Caleb for the first time. The heat was loosening its grip just enough to breathe. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked at nothing. The sky went orange, and then purple, and then dark. Tell me about your mother, Eleanor said. Caleb didn't move for a long time. She thought he might not answer. She was learning his silences. This one was different from the others. This one had weight. Her name was Ruth, he said finally. Ruth Boone. She came out here from Virginia with my father in '48. He died of cholera before they reached Kansas. She was 22 with a newborn, me, and nothing but a wagon and $40. How'd she end up in that cabin? Homesteaded it, built the walls herself, cut the timber, mixed the mortar, laid every stone. His voice roughened. She was stronger than anyone I ever knew. What happened with the women she took in? Started small. A girl showed up one winter, 15, pregnant, thrown out by her family. Mama took her in. Then another. Then a widow whose husband's brother was trying to claim her land. Word spread. Women started coming from as far as Wichita. And the town didn't like it. The town was fine with it until Reverend Hale arrived. Before him, there was an old preacher named Collins, who minded his own business. Hale came in 58, with big ideas about moral order and a voice that could fill a room. He told the men their wives were being corrupted, told the women that charity without permission was the same as rebellion. Permission from who? From him. Eleanor felt the anger rise in her chest like heat from the forge. So they turned on her. Slowly, the way towns do. Nobody throws the first stone. They just stop catching you when you fall. Stopped selling her supplies. Stopped letting their kids play with me. One Sunday, Hale preached a sermon about Jezebel and looked straight at her the whole time. His hands were still, absolutely still, but his voice was shaking at the foundation, down where you couldn't hear it unless you were listening for it. The flood came in April of '61. Creek rose 6 feet in one night. Water hit the cabin fast. She got me out through the window, told me to run to high ground. I was 13. Caleb. She went back for the 2 women staying with us, Sarah Pike and her daughter. She got them to the door. He stopped. Eleanor waited. The roof came down, he said. Sarah and her girl got out. Mama didn't. The silence after that was the kind you don't fill, the kind that demands to exist on its own terms. I ran to town, Caleb said, soaking wet, screaming for help, pounded on every door. You know how many opened? Eleanor's throat was tight. How many? 1. Your father's. She closed her eyes. Henry Whitfield grabbed a rope and a lantern and ran back with me in the dark. By the time we got there, the water had dropped enough to reach her. But she was gone, pinned under the beam. My father never told me. Your father never told anyone. That was the kind of man he was. Didn't do good things so people would know about it. Did them because they needed doing. Eleanor opened her eyes. The stars were out now, thick and white and indifferent. Is that why you came back? She asked. Because of what my father did? Partly, he paused, and partly because I heard what was happening here, and I thought, if Mama could see this town doing to another woman what they did to her, she'd want somebody to show up. Somebody. Anybody. But it was you. He turned his head and looked at her. In the dark, his eyes were just shadows, but she could feel the weight of his gaze like a hand pressed against her breastbone. Yeah, he said. It was me. She didn't reach for him. He didn't reach for her. But something in the space between them changed. Not smaller, but warmer. Like a forge that's been cold all winter, finally catching its first real heat. 3 more days. That's how long the fragile peace lasted. On Tuesday, Eleanor found a dead cat on her anvil. Throat cut. Blood pooled in the groove where hot iron usually sat. She stood there staring at it, and for the first time since the whipping, her hands didn't shake from anger. They shook from fear. Caleb appeared behind her. She heard his breath catch. Don't touch it, he said. I wasn't planning to. He picked it up himself, carried it out back, buried it without ceremony. When he came back, his face was different, harder. The gentleness she'd started to see in him had pulled back behind something older and colder. This isn't a boycott anymore, he said. I know. This is someone telling you what comes next. I know that too. Eleanor, you need to think about whether this forge is worth... Don't. Her voice cut like struck iron. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't you dare ask me if it's worth it. My father built this place with his hands. He taught me everything in this room. He died at that anvil. Heart gave out mid-swing, hammer still in his fist. This is not a building. This is everything I have left of him. Caleb looked at her, looked at the bloodstain on the anvil, looked at her belly. Then we need help, he said. From who? This town would watch me burn. Not the whole town. He was right, and she hated that he was right. That afternoon, Caleb walked to the edge of town where the small farms started. Eleanor didn't know where he went or who he talked to. He was gone 4 hours. When he came back, he had a bruise on his cheekbone and a split lip. "What happened?" Eleanor demanded. "Had a disagreement." "With who?" "Doesn't matter. It's settled." "Caleb Boone, you show up at my forge bleeding and tell me it doesn't matter?" "I talked to some people, ranchers, farmers, men who don't come to town much and don't care what Hale preaches." "And one of them hit you?" "One of them's married to Hale's sister. Took some convincing." "Convincing? You call that convincing?" "He swung first." The ghost of a smile. "I didn't swing back. That's what convinced him." She stared at him. This man, this impossible, infuriating, barely speaking man who took a punch to the face and called it diplomacy. "What did they say?" she asked. 3 families will bring work. Quietly. Back door, not the front. They don't want Hale knowing. So I'm taking secret customers now, like I'm running a card game. You're surviving. Call it whatever you want. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him she wouldn't hide. But the dead cat on her anvil was still fresh in her memory, and the child in her belly moved, and pride is a luxury that pregnancy can't always afford. "Fine," she said. "Back door. For now. For now." The work came. A broken plow from the Hendricks farm, wagon hardware from Old Man Coulter, a set of branding irons from a rancher named Dawes who lived 12 miles out and didn't give a damn what any preacher thought about anything. Eleanor worked. The forge stayed lit. The hammer sang. And for a week, things almost felt like they might hold. Then, Aldous Pruitt came back to Dry Creek. Eleanor was working the bellows when she heard the stagecoach. She didn't think anything of it. Coaches came through twice a week. But Caleb, who'd been sitting on the bench outside, stood up. That's what made her look. Caleb never stood up for anything unless it mattered. She came to the door and saw the coach stopped in front of the hotel. The door opened, and a man stepped down. Young, clean suit, polished boots that had never seen a day's honest work, hair slicked back with pomade. Aldous Pruitt, the banker's son, the father of her child. Eleanor's hand went to her belly without thinking. The other hand tightened on the tongs she was holding, until the metal bit into her palm. Aldous didn't look toward the forge. He looked at the hotel, adjusted his cuffs, and walked inside like a man returning to a place that belonged to him. Because in his mind, it did. "Eleanor," Caleb's voice, low, from the doorway. "I see him." "What do you want to do?" "I want to put these tongs through his teeth." She set them down carefully. "But I won't, because I'm better than that. And because my father raised me to solve problems with iron, not with rage. He'll come to you, or his mother will send him." "I know." "What will you say?" Eleanor looked at Caleb, and something in her face must have shown him everything, because he stepped back and gave her room, the way you give room to a fire that's about to grow. "I'll say what I should have said 5 months ago," she told him. "I'll say the truth." Aldous came on Thursday, not to the forge, to the cabin. He showed up just after noon, when the sun was at its worst, and the air tasted like dust and heat. Eleanor was inside, resting. Her back ached. The baby pressed against her ribs. A knock at the door. She opened it, and there he was. Same face, same weak jaw. Same eyes that had looked at her in her father's forge and said, "I love you," and meant, "I want you." which is not the same thing at all. Eleanor. He took off his hat. You look, well.
I look pregnant, Aldous. Say what you came to say.
He shifted his weight, glanced past her into the cabin, saw the narrow bed, the stove, the basin, saw how small her world had become. Mother told me what happened, he said. The whipping. Your mother watched while a man beat me with a leather strap because I'm carrying your child. You can say the word. His jaw worked. I didn't know they'd do that. You didn't care enough to stay and find out. I panicked, Eleanor. I'm not proud of it, but You ran. You took the morning coach with your pockets full of your father's money and you ran to St. Louis, where nobody knows your name, and you left me to stand in front of this town alone. I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry. She tasted the word like something spoiled. What are you here for, Aldous? What do you actually want? He straightened up, put his hat back on, and in that gesture, that small, practiced, confident gesture, she saw it. The rehearsal, the script, the deal his mother had written for him. I want to do right by you, he said. I want to marry you. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a gun. No, Eleanor said. Aldous blinked. What? No, I won't marry you. Eleanor, be reasonable. You're alone. You're pregnant. The town whipped me. Your family watched. You ran. And now you show up in a clean suit, offering to make an honest woman out of me like I'm a ledger that needs balancing? I'm offering you a life. You're offering me a cage with curtains. His face changed. The practiced softness fell away, and underneath it was something harder. Something that looked very much like his mother. You don't have a choice, he said quietly. You think you do, but you don't. My family owns the bank. The bank holds the note on this property, on the forge, on every piece of land within 10 miles of this town. Eleanor went cold. If you won't accept my offer willingly, Aldous said, Mother will call the note. You'll lose the forge, the cabin, everything. You'll have nothing. Your mother doesn't hold the note on this cabin. She holds it on the forge, and without the forge, what are you? A pregnant woman with no income and no husband in a town that already thinks you're cursed. Eleanor's hands were fists at her sides. Her nails cut into her palms. The baby kicked hard, right under her ribs, like even the child inside her was angry. Get off this porch, she said. Eleanor, get off this porch before I forget my father raised me gentle. Aldous looked at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Was it fear? Regret? She didn't care enough to find out. He stepped back. The offer stands until Sunday, he said. After that, Mother acts. He turned and walked away, clean boots on dirty ground, not once looking back. Eleanor stood in the doorway until he disappeared around the bend. Then her knees buckled. She grabbed the doorframe and held herself upright through pure will, because the ground was pulling at her, and the world was spinning, and everything she'd built, every day of hammering, every night of planning, every ounce of stubbornness that had kept her standing at that hitching post, all of it was balanced on a piece of paper in Margaret Pruitt's desk. Caleb found her like that, gripping the doorframe, staring at nothing, face white. What happened? He asked, and his voice had that edge again. The one that said he was holding something dangerous on a very short leash. She told him. Every word. The proposal, the threat, the note on the forge. Caleb listened without moving. When she finished, the silence stretched so long she thought he might not speak at all. Then he said, How much? What? The note. How much does she owe on the forge? I don't. My father took the loan 5 years ago. I don't even know the terms. Then we find out.
How? The bank isn't going to show me anything. They're the Pruitt's bank.
There are records. County seat keeps copies of every property note filed in the territory.
The county seat is 30 miles away.
I have a horse. She looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd walked into her life without invitation, who'd cut her loose from a post, who'd slept on porches and cleaned wounds and taken punches and never once asked for anything in return.
Why? She whispered. Why do you keep doing this?
He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his damaged voice was barely above a breath. Because somebody should. He left before dawn the next morning. She heard him saddle the horse in the dark, heard the creak of leather and the soft words he murmured to the animal, heard his boots cross the yard and stop outside her door. He didn't knock, but she was awake, and she pressed her hand flat against the door, and on the other side she heard his palm press against the same spot. They stood like that for 3 heartbeats. Then he was gone. And Eleanor was alone in Dry Creek, with a forge, a threat, and 4 days until Sunday. She lit the fire anyway, because that's what Whitfields do. Caleb had been gone 2 days when the rock came through the window. Eleanor was at the anvil, working a set of hinges for Old Man Coulter, when the glass shattered inward and something heavy skidded across the stone floor and stopped at her feet. A river rock the size of a man's fist, wrapped in burlap, with a word scratched into it with a nail. Whore. She didn't flinch. She picked up the rock, turned it over in her hand, and set it on the workbench next to her tongs. Then she walked to the broken window and looked out. The street was empty. Whoever threw it was already gone, swallowed back into the respectable anonymity of Dry Creek, Kansas territory, where men did their cruelty in the dark and called themselves Christians in the morning. Eleanor swept the glass, nailed a board over the window, went back to work. But her hands were cold. July heat pouring through the forge door like water, and her hands were cold. Because she was alone now, truly alone, and the baby pressed hard against her ribs, and Caleb was 30 miles away, chasing a piece of paper that might already be worthless. And Sunday was 2 days from now. 2 days until Margaret Pruitt called the note. 2 days until she lost everything. She hammered until her shoulders burned. She hammered until the hinges were perfect. She hammered because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant fear. And fear was a luxury she couldn't afford with a child inside her, and a dead man's forge around her, and a whole town waiting for her to break. Dale Crenshaw came by at noon with a sack of flour and a jar of preserves. "Didn't ask for charity, Dale." "Ain't charity, it's a trade. I need a new latch for my back door. You make me one, we'll call it even." She looked at the old man. His hands were trembling. Not from age, from nerves. He kept glancing over his shoulder at the street, like a man expecting to be caught. "Who threw the rock?" she asked. Dale's face tightened. "I don't know for certain." "But you know something." He set the sack down on the bench, took a long breath. "Jed Parker and Billy Sims were drinking at the hotel last night, talking loud, saying things about how Hale's too patient, saying somebody ought to do more than talk." More than talk. Their words, not mine. Jed Parker. Eleanor said the name like she was reading it off a warrant. Jed Parker, who brought me a broken plow chain 2 weeks ago, who shook my hand and called me Miss Whitfield and smiled at me. People ain't what they are in daylight when the dark comes, Eleanor. You know that. She did know that. She'd learned it the morning they tied her to a post, and 60 people she'd known her whole life watched a man open her back with a leather strap. "Dale, What else are they planning? The old man looked at her. His eyes were wet. She'd never seen Dale Crenshaw's eyes wet in her life, and the sight of it scared her more than the rock. "I heard kerosene mentioned," he said quietly. "That's all I'm going to say." He left the flower and walked away fast, hat pulled down, shoulders hunched, a good man doing what little he could while trying not to get destroyed for it. Eleanor stood in the forge and pressed both hands against her belly. "It's all right," she whispered. "We're all right." But she wasn't talking to the baby. She was talking to herself. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat in the cabin with her father's old shotgun across her knees, the one he'd kept above the forge door for rattlesnakes, the one she hadn't fired in 3 years. She didn't know if it would even work, but the weight of it in her hands was something, and something was better than nothing. Every sound was a threat. The creak of the cottonwoods, the rustle of wind through the buffalo grass, a coyote howling somewhere west of town, thin and lonely and wild. She thought about Caleb. She thought about his hands on her wounds that first night. The way he'd said, "Fair enough," when she told him she hadn't decided whether to trust him. The way he'd pressed his palm against the door before he left, matching hers on the other side. A touch without touching. She thought about his mother, Ruth, cutting timber alone at 22 with a baby on her hip. She thought about her father walking 4 miles in the snow to feed a woman the town wanted to forget. She thought about the chain of stubborn kindness that connected all of them. Ruth to Henry to Caleb to her. Like links in iron, each one forged in fire, each one holding the next. And she thought, I will not be the link that breaks. Dawn came slow and mean. The heat was already building by the time the sun cleared the horizon, and Eleanor's back ached from sitting upright all night with a shotgun she wasn't sure she could fire. She opened the forge anyway, lit the fire, pumped the bellows, let the hammer ring. Saturday. 1 day left. By mid-morning, she knew something was wrong. The street was too quiet. Even for a hot Saturday, there should have been wagons, horses, women heading to the general store. But the street was empty, like the town had pulled its people inside and shut its doors. Then she saw them. 4 men walking up the street toward the forge. Jed Parker in front, Billy Sims beside him. 2 others she recognized, ranch hands who worked the Pruitt spread, men with thick arms and empty faces. They were carrying kerosene cans. Eleanor's heart slammed against her ribs. She gripped the edge of the anvil until her knuckles went white. The baby kicked, once, hard, like a warning. She could run. The back door was 10 steps behind her. She could run to the cabin, grab the shotgun, lock herself inside. But the forge, her father's forge, the anvil where Henry Whitfield's heart had stopped mid-swing, the tongs he'd wrapped her small fingers around when she was 9, the sign above the door in his handwriting. Every piece of iron she'd ever shaped, every nail, every hinge, every horseshoe, they were all in this room, and they were all him. She didn't run. She picked up her hammer and walked to the door. Jed Parker stopped 20 feet from the forge. He had the decency to look uncomfortable, which was more than she expected and less than she deserved. "Eleanor," he said, "you need to step out of there." "Why's that, Jed?" "Reverend Hale says that forge is a symbol of rebellion, says it needs to come down." "Reverend Hale says a lot of things. Last Sunday, he said the meek shall inherit the earth. Funny how the meek always seem to be the ones holding kerosene." Billy Sims shifted his weight. "Don't make this hard, Eleanor." "I'm not making anything. You 4 are the ones walking up my street with cans in your hands. You want to explain to me how burning down a woman's livelihood is God's work? Go on, I'm listening." Jed looked at Billy. Billy looked at the ranch hands. The ranch hands looked at their boots. "We got our orders," Jed said. "From who? Hale or Margaret Pruitt? Because those are different orders, Jed, and you're smart enough to know it. Hale wants me punished because I won't kneel. Margaret wants me gone because I'm carrying proof that her precious son isn't the saint she raised him to be. Which one are you working for?" Jed's face reddened. She'd hit something. She pushed harder. "You came to my forge 3 weeks ago with a broken chain. I fixed it in an hour. Charged you fair. You shook my hand and called me by name. Now you're here to burn me out? What changed, Jed? What changed between then and now, except a preacher told you to be afraid of a pregnant woman with a hammer? It ain't about fear. It's always about fear. Every whipping, every boycott, every rock through my window. It's fear dressed up as righteousness. You're scared of me, Jed. All of you. You're scared because I didn't scream at that post. You're scared because I came back to work. You're scared because a woman who won't break is the most dangerous thing a town like this can face." Silence. The heap pressed down. Sweat ran down Jed's face. The kerosene cans glinted in the sun. Then a voice came from behind them. Not loud, not angry, just clear. "She's right, Jed." Everyone turned. Tom Briggs stood in the middle of the street. Behind him were Dale Crenshaw and Old Man Coulter, and a man Eleanor didn't recognize. Weathered, sunburned, a rancher from the look of him. Tom walked forward until he stood between Eleanor and the 4 men. He wasn't armed. His hands were empty. But he stood like a man who'd made a decision and wasn't interested in being talked out of it. "Tom, this ain't your business," Jed said. "It became my business when you picked up kerosene to burn a woman's forge. What's next? You gonna burn her cabin too? With her in it? She's 5 months pregnant, Jed. You want to stand before God and explain that? Reverend Hale says, Reverend Hale hasn't fixed a wheel or shot a horse or done a single useful thing since he came to this town. All he does is talk. And all you're doing right now is following talk with fire. And that makes you worse than him, because at least he doesn't pretend to be your friend first." Jed's grip on the kerosene can loosened. Billy Sims took a half step back. Dale Crenshaw moved up beside Tom. Then Coulter. Then the rancher Eleanor didn't know, who tipped his hat to her and said, "Ma'am, name's Dawes. I believe you made my branding irons." "I did," Eleanor said. "Best irons I've ever used. Be ashamed to lose the forge that made them." 4 men with kerosene, 4 men without it. The street between them hot and still, and full of the kind of silence that decides things. Jed Parker looked at Eleanor, looked at the men standing in front of her, looked at the kerosene can in his hand. He set it down. "Damn it," he said. "Damn it, I know she ain't done nothing wrong. I known her since she was a girl. Hale gets in your head, you know? Gets in there and twists things around until you can't tell which way is right. The way that doesn't involve burning a pregnant woman's livelihood," Tom said. "That's the way that's right." Jed rubbed his face with both hands, looked at Billy. Billy set his can down too. The ranch hands followed, slow and sheepish, like boys caught stealing apples. "Get those cans out of here," Tom said. "And Jed, next time a preacher tells you to do something you'd be ashamed to tell your mother about, maybe don't do it." They left, all 4 of them, walking back down the street with their shoulders low and their hands empty, leaving 4 kerosene cans sitting in the dust like tombstones for something that almost happened, but didn't. Eleanor's legs were shaking. She leaned against the doorframe and pressed her hand to her chest and felt her heart hammering so hard she thought the baby must be able to hear it. "Thank you," she said. Her voice cracked on it. "Tom, Dale, all of you, thank you." Tom Briggs turned to her, and his eyes were bright. "Don't thank me. Thank that stubborn cowboy of yours. He rode to my place before he left town and asked me to watch out for you. Said if I had any decency left in me, I'd use it."
He said that?
Exact words. Well, more or less. Man doesn't use many of them, so the ones he picks tend to stick. Eleanor almost laughed, almost cried. She did neither. She just stood there in the doorway of her father's forge, with her hand on her belly and her back straight, and her eyes burning with something that wasn't tears. It was an hour past noon when the crowd gathered. Not the mob, the real crowd. The people of Dry Creek, drawn out of their houses by the commotion, gathering in clusters of 2 and 3 along the main street, whispering, watching, waiting for something they could feel coming, the way you feel thunder before you hear it. Baron Tobias Hale walked out of the chapel. He was wearing his black Sunday coat, even though it was Saturday. His Bible was in his hand. His face was the color of a man who'd been told his army didn't show up for the battle. He walked straight to the forge. Eleanor was inside. Tom and the others had gone, each back to their own business, leaving her alone in the heat with her hammer and her fire. Hale stopped in the doorway. "You turned my men away," he said. "They weren't your men, Reverend. They were their own men who forgot it for a while." "You think this is over? You think a few sympathetic fools are enough to—" "I think you're standing in my doorway, and I think you should either come in and say what you came to say, or get out of my light." Hale stepped inside. He was taller than she remembered. Or maybe she'd been smaller the last time they were face to face. Smaller and bleeding and tied to a post. "I gave you 5 lashes," he said. "I could have given you 20. I showed you mercy. You showed me leather. I showed you the consequences of sin, and your response was to spit in the face of this community, to take up with a drifter, to flaunt your shame." "My shame?" Eleanor set down her hammer. She stepped toward him. 1 step. 2. Close enough to see the broken veins in his nose, the sweat on his upper lip, the way his left eyelid twitched when he was losing control. "My shame, Reverend? Let me tell you about shame. Shame is a town that watched a man whip a pregnant woman and called it justice. Shame is a banker's wife who knew her son was crawling through my window every Saturday night and didn't say a word until my belly showed. Shame is you, standing in your pulpit with your clean hands, preaching about morality while you beat women in the street." Hale's face twisted. "You will not speak to me. I will speak to you any way I choose, because you are standing in my forge, and in this room, I am the authority. Not you, not your God. Me." The words hit him like a slap. She saw it, the physical recoil, the widening of his eyes, the way his hand tightened on the Bible like he was trying to wring comfort out of it. "You are lost," he whispered. "You are truly lost." "No, Reverend, I'm found. I'm standing in the place my father built, doing the work he taught me, carrying a child who will know that their mother didn't break. That's not lost. That's the most found I've ever been." Hale stared at her. A long, terrible silence. Something shifted in his face, not softening, but cracking, like a wall that's held too long against pressure it wasn't built for. "The banknote," he said quietly. "Margaret will call it tomorrow." "I know. You'll lose everything. Maybe. And you still won't repent. There's nothing to repent for. I loved a man who didn't deserve it. That's not a sin. That's a mistake. And I'm the only one paying for it." Hale turned and walked out of the forge. He didn't look back. He didn't slam the door. He just walked away, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that Eleanor hadn't seen before. Not defeat, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first crack in a dam that hadn't learned yet that it was already falling. The sun was going down when she heard the horse. Fast, coming from the east road, hooves hammering the packed dirt like a heartbeat. She was at the cabin door before the rider came around the bend, and her breath caught in her throat because she knew that horse, knew that long duster, knew the way he sat in the saddle like a man who'd been born there. Caleb. He reined in hard. The horse skidded. He was off the saddle before the dust settled, hitting the ground at a run, and his face was something she'd never seen on him before. Open, urgent, alive. He had a paper in his hand. "The note," he said, breathing hard. "Your father's note." "What about it?" "Paid in full, 18 months ago." The world stopped. "What?" "Your father paid off the forged note 18 months before he died. I got the county record, stamped and sealed. Margaret Pruitt has no claim." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Her knees buckled. Caleb caught her arm, strong, steady, and held her upright. "She lied," Eleanor whispered. "She bluffed. She was counting on you not knowing, counting on you being too scared to check." "That, all of it, the threat, Aldous, the deadline, it was all a bluff. Every word." Eleanor stared at the paper in his hand. Her father's name in faded ink. A county seal pressed into wax. The words, "Paid in full," in a clerk's careful handwriting. Her father. Dead 3 years. Still protecting her. She pressed the paper to her chest and felt something break open inside her. Not breaking apart, but breaking free. Like water through a dam. Like heat through cold iron. Like a voice that's been held silent too long, finally filling the room. She didn't cry. She laughed, standing in the dirt outside her cabin, with her hand on her belly, and Caleb Boone's grip on her arm, and her father's paid note against her heart. Eleanor Whitfield laughed until her ribs ached, and the coyotes answered from the western hills. Caleb watched her with those gray creekwater eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, his face was soft. Not guarded, not careful. Soft, like a man seeing something he'd stopped believing existed. "You rode 60 miles, she said, still catching her breath. "I did." "In 2 days." "Wasn't going to make it 3. "You could have been killed on that road. Bandits, snakes, that horse could have thrown a shoe." "Could have. Didn't." She looked at him. He looked at her. The sky behind him was going dark, stars punching through the blue like nails through tin, and his hand was still on her arm, warm and rough and absolutely still. "Caleb Boone," she said. "Yeah?" "When this is over, you and I are going to have a conversation about why you do things like this." "Looking forward to it." She held the paper up. "Tomorrow morning, I'm walking into that church, and I'm showing this to every person in that town. I know you are. You coming with me?" He didn't answer with words. He just stood there, beside her, the way he'd been standing since the day he cut her loose. And that was enough. She walked into that church like a woman walking into her own forge, spine straight, shoulders back, fire behind her eyes. Sunday morning. The pews were full. Every soul in Dry Creek who could sit upright and pretend to be righteous was packed inside that chapel. And they all turned when the door opened and Eleanor Whitfield stepped through it with Caleb Boone 1 pace behind her. She was wearing her work dress, the only clean one she had left. It pulled tight across her belly. 5 months, almost 6 now. And she didn't try to hide it, didn't wrap a shawl around her middle. didn't hunch her shoulders or lower her eyes. She stood in that doorway and let every single one of them see exactly what she was. A pregnant woman, unmarried, unbroken, and holding a piece of paper that was about to change everything. Reverend Hale was mid-sentence when she entered. Something about the wages of sin. His voice cut off like someone had grabbed his throat. "Good morning, Reverend," Eleanor said. "I hope you don't mind. I have something to share with your congregation." "This is a house of worship. You have no right to—" "I have every right. I was born in this town, baptized in this church. My father built the hinges on that door you're standing next to. I'd say I've earned 5 minutes." Hale looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back. Didn't move. Didn't need to. Eleanor walked up the center aisle. She could feel their eyes. Margaret Pruitt in the second row, face like a closed fist. Clara Briggs beside Tom, her hands twisting in her lap. Dale Crenshaw in the back, already half standing like he was ready to catch her if she fell. Jed Parker near the window, unable to look at her directly. And Aldous Pruitt, sitting beside his mother, wearing the same clean suit he'd worn when he told her she had no choice. Eleanor stopped at the front of the church. She turned to face them all. "3 weeks ago," she said, "I was tied to the post outside this building and whipped 5 times. Most of you watched. Some of you looked away. None of you stopped it. Nobody moved. 2 days ago, 4 men came to my forge with kerosene. They were going to burn it down. Burn down the business my father spent 20 years building. Because a preacher told them my existence was an affront to God." She held up the paper. "Yesterday, Aldous Pruitt came to my cabin and told me I had to marry him or lose everything. He said his mother held the note on my forge. He said if I refused, she'd call it in and leave me with nothing." Margaret Pruitt's chin lifted. Her eyes were hard and bright, and absolutely sure of themselves. "He lied," Eleanor said. She unfolded the paper, held it high so the light from the window caught the county seal. "My father paid off the note on that forge 18 months before he died. Paid in full, stamped and recorded at the county seat. Margaret Pruitt has no claim on my property. She never did." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Eleanor had ever heard. Margaret's face didn't crumble. It froze, like a pond in the first instant of winter. Surface going hard and still, while everything underneath churned. Aldous stared at his mother. His mouth opened. She felt a grim satisfaction, watching him realize that the weapon his mother had handed him was empty. "That's a lie," Margaret said. Her voice was tight, controlled, but Eleanor could hear the cracks in it. "That document is forged. It's stamped by the county clerk and filed in the territorial records. You're welcome to ride 30 miles and check for yourself, Mrs. Pruitt. I'll even loan you a horse." A murmur rippled through the pews. Not loud, just a sound. The sound of people recalculating, adjusting, realizing that the story they'd been told was missing important pieces. Tom Briggs stood up. "I'd like to see that document, Eleanor." She handed it to him. He read it, passed it to Dale. Dale read it, nodded, and passed it to the row behind him. The paper moved through that church like a living thing, hand to hand, pew to pew, and with every person who read it, the air in the room changed. "This doesn't change what she did," Hale said from the pulpit. His voice had found its footing again, not strong, but steady enough. "She still carries a child out of wedlock. She still defies the moral order of, she carries my son's child." Every head in the church turned. It was Margaret Pruitt who spoke. Not voluntarily. The words seemed to have been torn from her by the force of 50 people staring at a county seal that proved she'd lied. Her face was gray. Her hands gripped the pew in front of her like a woman holding onto a cliff. "She carries my son's child," Margaret repeated, quieter now. "And my son is sitting right here." Aldous went white. "Mother!" "Be quiet, Aldous." The church was so still, Eleanor could hear her own pulse in her ears. Margaret stood. She was trembling, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding herself together while the framework she'd built around her family's reputation collapsed in real time. "I knew," Margaret said. "I knew Aldous was visiting her. I knew what they were doing. I told myself it would pass. Young men are foolish. But when she started showing, She stopped, swallowed, looked at Eleanor with eyes that held something Eleanor hadn't expected. Shame. Not the performed shame of public confession. Real shame. The kind that lives in your stomach and eats you from the inside. "I told Aldous to leave town," Margaret said. "I told him I would handle it. I went to Reverend Hale and I told him Eleanor needed to be corrected. I suggested the post." Tom Briggs said, "Good Lord." "I thought if she was punished publicly, she'd leave. I thought she'd run, take the shame somewhere else where it couldn't touch us." Margaret's voice cracked. "I didn't expect her to stay." Eleanor stood in the front of that church and watched the most powerful woman in Dry Creek unravel. She waited for satisfaction, waited for triumph, waited for the vindication she'd earned through weeks of bleeding and hammering and refusing to kneel. It didn't come. What came instead was pity, and she hated it, because pity was not what Margaret Pruitt deserved, but it was what Eleanor felt, a deep, exhausting pity for a woman who'd spent her whole life building walls and was watching them fall, and had no idea who she was without them. "I don't want your confession, Margaret," Eleanor said. "I don't want your apology. I don't want your son." Aldous flinched. "I want to be left alone. I want to work my forge. I want to raise my child. And I want every person in this room to understand that what was done to me was not justice, and was not God's will, and was not correction. It was cruelty, plain and simple. And it started because one woman was too proud to admit her son was human." Eleanor looked at Hale. "And one preacher was too hungry for power to question where his orders came from." Hale's face was stone, but the stone was cracking. She could see it in the way his hands shook on the Bible, in the way his eyes darted from Margaret to the congregation and back, calculating, searching for ground that wasn't crumbling under his feet. "You used God as a whip," Eleanor said to him. "You wrapped your cruelty in Scripture and called it righteousness. And these people followed you because they were scared. And scared people do terrible things when someone tells them it's holy." She turned back to the congregation. "I'm not asking you to be sorry. Sorry doesn't fix the scars on my back. I'm asking you to be honest with yourselves about what you saw and what you did and what you allowed." She folded the paper, put it in her pocket. "My forge is open. My door is open. If you need ironwork, you know where to find me. If you don't, that's your business. But I'm done hiding. I'm done being quiet. And I'm done pretending that this town's opinion of me matters more than my opinion of myself." She walked back down the aisle. Caleb fell in beside her. They reached the door, and Eleanor pushed it open, and the July sunlight hit her face like a benediction that didn't require a preacher to deliver it. Behind her, she heard the murmur begin, rising, spreading, the sound of a town starting a conversation it should have had a long time ago. She didn't look back. They were halfway to the forge when Caleb spoke. "That was something," he said. "It was necessary." Didn't say it wasn't, said it was something. She glanced at him. He was looking straight ahead, but there was a looseness in his shoulders she hadn't seen before, like a weight had shifted. "You didn't say a word in there," she said. "Didn't need to. You said everything."
I almost lost my nerve when Margaret stood up. "No, you didn't. How would you know?" "Because I was watching your hands. They didn't shake once." She looked down at her hands, calloused, scarred, strong. Hands that had held a hammer, and held a shotgun, and held a baby that hadn't been born yet, and never once let go of anything that mattered. "Caleb." "Yeah? I want to know something, and I want a real answer, not one of your 3-word specials." He almost smiled. She saw the corner of his mouth lift, and then discipline itself back down. "Your mother, Ruth, when the town turned on her, did she ever think about leaving?" He was quiet for a long time. They walked. The dirt road stretched ahead, heat shimmering off it, and she waited, because she was learning that Caleb's silences weren't emptiness. They were rooms he entered before he spoke, and the longer he stayed inside, the more the words meant when they finally came out. "She thought about it every day," he said. "She told me once, I was maybe 10. She said, 'Caleb, there are 2 kinds of leaving. One is with your feet, and one is with your spirit. I can't stop my feet from wanting to go, but I'll be damned if I let my spirit walk out of here.'" Eleanor felt those words settle into her like iron into a mold, hot and heavy and permanent. "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was just stubborn, same as you." "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it." They reached the forge. Eleanor opened the doors. The coals from yesterday were still warm. She could feel the heat coming off them, banked but alive, waiting to be stirred back into flame. She lit the fire. Then she heard footsteps. She turned. Tom Briggs was walking up the street toward the forge. Behind him was Dale. Behind Dale was Coulter. Behind Coulter was the rancher Dawes. And behind Dawes came 2 women Eleanor didn't immediately recognize. And then she did. Hazel Fenwick. And behind Hazel, walking like a woman crossing a battlefield, Clara Briggs, Tom's wife. Clara, who had stood beside Margaret outside the forge a week ago. Clara, who had looked at the ground while Margaret delivered her threats. Clara, who hadn't said a word. Clara walked up to the forge door and stopped. Her face was flushed, her eyes were red, her hands were balled into fists at her sides, and she looked like a woman who had spent the walk from the church to here, arguing with every version of herself that had ever stayed silent. "I should have stopped it," Clara said. "The day they tied you up. I was there. I watched. And I didn't say a single thing." Eleanor looked at her. "No, you didn't." "I was scared. Margaret, she has a way of making you feel like if you cross her, you'll lose everything. Your standing, your friends, your husband's business. I know what Margaret has a way of doing, Clara. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that. Not yet." "Maybe not ever." Clara's voice broke. She steadied it. "But I'm asking if you need help." "Help? In the forge. I don't know ironwork, but I can pump bellows. I can sweep. I can keep books. I can do something." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I need to do something, Eleanor. I can't just go home and cook supper and pretend this didn't happen." Eleanor looked past Clara at the others. Tom, hat in his hands. Dale, nodding slowly. Coulter and Dawes standing like men who'd picked a side and intended to stay on it. "I don't have money to pay anyone," Eleanor said. "I didn't ask for money, and I'm not easy to work for. My father used to say I had the temperament of a forge fire. Useful when directed, dangerous when ignored." Clara almost laughed. It came out watery and broken and completely real. "I can handle forge fires," Clara said.
Eleanor looked at Caleb. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and something in his face, something she couldn't quite name but would remember for the rest of her life, told her this was the moment. Not the speech in the church, not the paper, not the kerosene standoff. This. A woman who had been too afraid to speak, now standing in her doorway, asking to work. "Come in," Eleanor said. "I'll show you the bellows." Clara stepped inside, and the forge that Henry Whitfield built for himself became something he never imagined. The beginning of something bigger than one man's work, bigger than one woman's defiance, bigger than the town that tried to crush them both. 3 days later, Hazel Fenwick brought her sister. Her sister brought a friend. The friend brought a widow from a farm 8 miles east who'd been mending her own tools since her husband died, and doing it badly. Eleanor taught them all. Not gently. Not with patience she didn't possess. She taught them the way her father had taught her, by putting a hammer in their hands and saying, "Hit," and not telling them they were doing it wrong until they'd figured it out for themselves. The forge got louder. The work got done. The town got used to it. Or didn't. But the town's opinion had stopped being relevant sometime around the moment Eleanor Whitfield walked into a church and told them so. On Wednesday evening, a week after the church, Eleanor was closing up when a knock came at the cabin door. She opened it, expecting Caleb, who'd gone to return Dawes' repaired harness. It wasn't Caleb. It was Aldous Pruitt. He looked like something that had been washed and wrung out too many times. His suit was rumpled. His eyes were circled dark. He held his hat in his hands, turning it around and around by the brim. "Before you shut the door," he said quickly, "please, 2 minutes." "You've got 1. I told my mother I'm not going back to St. Louis." Eleanor waited. "I told her I'm staying in Dry Creek, and I told her I'm not going to pretend anymore." He swallowed. "I'm not asking you to marry me. I understand. I heard you. In the church. Every word. I understand you don't want me, and I earned that." "Yes, you did. But the child, Eleanor, the child is mine too. And I'm not. I know I ran. I know I'm a coward. I know every terrible thing you think about me is true. But I want to do something. Not for you. For the baby." Eleanor leaned against the doorframe. She studied him. This man she had loved once, or thought she had. This boy, really, in a man's body, who had held her in a dark forge and whispered promises and then vanished at the first sign of consequence. He was shaking, not performing, actually shaking. "What do you want to do, Aldous?" "I want to provide. I'll set up an account at the bank in the child's name. Not my mother's bank, the Territorial Bank in Abilene. My money, not hers. Enough to make sure the child never wants for anything. I don't want your family's money. It's not my family's money. It's mine. I've been working in St. Louis, clerking at a shipping firm. It's not much, but it's honest, and it's mine." She looked at him. Really looked. And underneath the weakness and the fear and the polished boots, she saw something she hadn't expected. A man trying, clumsily and too late, to be something other than what his mother had made him. "You don't get to be this child's father," she said. "You lost that the morning you took the coach." He flinched. His eyes went wet. "But," she said, and the word hung in the air like a held breath, "if you want to contribute to the child's welfare, I won't stop you. Put the money in an account. Don't put conditions on it. Don't use it as leverage. And don't come to my door again expecting gratitude." "I won't." "And Aldous." "Yes?" "Tell your mother to stay away from me. If she comes near my forge, my cabin, or my child, I'll show that county document to every newspaper between here and Topeka. The story of how the respectable Margaret Pruitt faked a banknote to blackmail a pregnant woman makes for very interesting reading." Aldous nodded. He looked like a man who'd been carrying something heavy and had just been allowed to set it down. Not all of it, but enough to straighten up. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he said. "I know that's not enough." "It's not, but it's a start." He put his hat on, turned to leave, stopped. "The cowboy," he said without turning around. "Boone. Is he good to you?" "He's good near me. That's all I need." Aldous nodded once more and walked away into the dark. Eleanor closed the door. She pressed her forehead against the wood and breathed. In and out. In and out. The baby moved, a slow roll like a boat turning in calm water, and she put her hand on her belly and held it there. "Your father's a fool," she whispered. "But he's trying, and I reckon that's more than most fools manage." She heard Caleb's horse coming up the road, heard him dismount, heard his boots cross the yard and stop at the door. This time he knocked. She opened it. He looked at her face and read something there. He always could, even in the dark, even when she thought she was hiding it. "Pruitt was here," he said, not a question. He was. "You all right?" She reached out and took his hand, just took it, wrapped her fingers around his scarred knuckles and held on. His breath caught. She felt it, that tiny hitch, that moment of surprise from a man who'd spent years not being touched. "I'm all right," she said. His fingers closed around hers. Rough, warm, careful the way he did everything. Like he knew exactly how much strength he had and was always choosing to use less of it. They stood in the doorway with their hands clasped, and the Kansas dark around them, and the forge down the road still ticking as it cooled, and neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. Some things don't need language. Some things just need two people standing in the same place at the same time, choosing to stay. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Caleb squeezed back. And somewhere in the dark, a coyote sang. Long, thin, wild. And for the first time since the whipping, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded free. The baby came 3 weeks early. Eleanor was at the anvil when the first pain hit, a white-hot bolt that started in her lower back and wrapped around her belly like a band of heated iron. She dropped the hammer. It rang against the stone floor, and the sound brought Clara running from the back room. "Eleanor! I'm fine, I just—" The second pain cut her off. Deeper, harder. She grabbed the edge of the anvil and bent double, and the sound that came out of her was not a scream, but something older. A sound that belonged to every woman who'd ever brought life into the world through sheer force of will. "You're not fine," Clara said. "How far apart?" I don't know. A minute? Maybe less." "A minute?" Clara's face went pale. "Eleanor, that's too fast. That's way too fast." "I know what it is, Clara." "We need to get you to the cabin. Where's Caleb?" "Dawes' ranch, fixing the corral fence." "That's 3 hours round trip." "Then I reckon he's going to miss this." Another contraction. Eleanor's knees buckled. Clara caught her, barely, staggering under the weight. And then Hazel was there, and Hazel's sister Mary. And between the three of them, they got Eleanor out of the forge and across the yard to the cabin. Clara sent Mary's boy running to find Caleb, sent Hazel to the general store for clean cloth and hot water, sent word to anyone in town who had a lick of sense and a willingness to help. Eleanor lay on the narrow bed in the cabin, the same bed Caleb had laid her on the night he cut her free, and she gripped the iron rail of the headboard, and she breathed. "I'm not ready," she said through her teeth. "It's too early. The baby's too early." Babies don't ask permission, Clara said. She was rolling up her sleeves and her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Tom Briggs' wife, the woman who'd stood silent at the hitching post and had been making up for it every day since. I've had 4 children, Eleanor. I know what I'm doing. You need to trust me. I trust you. Good. Now stop talking and push when I tell you to push. The labor was hard. Harder than anything Eleanor had ever done, and she'd spent her life bending iron. The contractions came in waves, relentless, merciless, each one stronger than the last. And between them, she lay gasping and soaked with sweat and gripping the headboard until her knuckles cracked. Clara worked. Hazel brought water. Mary stood by the door, wringing her hands. An hour passed. 2. Something's wrong, Eleanor whispered. She could feel it. The baby wasn't moving right, wasn't turning, was stuck somewhere between her body and the world. Clara, something's wrong. Clara's face was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that meant she was holding back something terrible. The baby's turned wrong, Clara said quietly. Breech. Feet first. What does that mean? It means this is going to be harder than it should be. And it means I need you to do exactly what I say. Clara! Eleanor, look at me. Clara's hands were on her shoulders. Her eyes were fierce and bright and absolutely present. You survived a whipping. You faced down a mob with kerosene. You stood in front of that church and told every soul in this town who you were. This baby is not going to beat you. Do you hear me? This baby is not going to beat you. Eleanor's eyes burned. She nodded. Push. She pushed. The pain was beyond anything she had language for. It was the hitching post and the forge fire, and every blow she'd ever taken rolled into one endless moment. She screamed. Finally, after weeks of refusing, after the whipping and the threats and the kerosene and the bluff, Eleanor Whitfield screamed. And she didn't stop. She pushed and screamed and pushed, and her body tore itself open, and she thought of her father at the anvil, his heart stopping mid-swing. And she thought, if this is how it ends, if I die on this bed the way he died at that anvil, with the work still in my hands, then at least I die doing something that matters. I see feet, Clara said. Keep going. Don't stop. She didn't stop. One more push. The world went white. Her voice gave out. Her hands slipped on the headboard rail. And then, sound. A cry, thin and furious and perfect, splitting the air of that small cabin like the first strike of a hammer on cold iron. A boy, Clara said. Her voice was shaking now, all the calm gone, replaced by something raw and wondering. Eleanor, it's a boy. Clara placed the child on Eleanor's chest. He was small, too small, born early, slippery and red and wailing. But his fists were clenched and his lungs were strong, and when Eleanor put her hand on his back, she felt his heartbeat against her palm, steady and fast and unbelievably real. Hello, she whispered. Hello, you. The baby stopped crying, just like that. Like her voice was the one sound in the world he'd been waiting to hear. He needs a name, Clara said, wiping her eyes. Eleanor looked down at her son. His eyes were closed. His fingers curled around the edge of her dress. Tiny, perfect, already holding on. Silas, she said. His name is Silas. What does it mean? Of the forest. Unbroken. Clara smiled. Hazel cried. Mary crossed herself and whispered a prayer. And Eleanor held her son against her heart and felt the last wall inside her, the one she'd built to survive the whipping and the boycott and the threats and the loneliness come down. Not crumbling, not breaking, just opening, like a door she'd been holding shut for months, finally swinging wide to let in everything she'd been too afraid to feel. Love, that's what it was. Not the love she'd thought she felt for Aldous, which was need dressed up in a borrowed dress. Not the careful, measured affection she was building with Caleb, which was something stronger and slower and still taking shape. This was something else entirely. Immediate, total, ferocious. The kind of love that rewrites every equation you've ever solved and makes the answer always the same. Him. This boy. This screaming, breathing, impossible boy. Everything had been for him. Caleb arrived at sunset. He came through the door already knowing. Mary's boy had found him on the road back, shouting the news before his horse had fully stopped. And he came in quiet, hat in his hands, and he stood in the doorway and looked at Eleanor holding the baby, and his face did something she had never seen it do. It broke open. Not crying. Caleb Boone wasn't a man who cried, not outwardly, not where anyone could see. But something behind his eyes shattered, and for one unguarded second, she saw everything he'd ever lost. His mother, his home, his voice, his trust in the world, and everything he'd found again in this room. "Come here," Eleanor said. He crossed the room in 3 steps, sat on the edge of the bed, looked down at the baby, at Silas, sleeping now, one tiny fist pressed against Eleanor's collarbone. "He's small," Caleb said. His damaged voice was rough. "He's early." "He's perfect." "He looks like trouble." Caleb almost laughed. She heard it catch in his throat, halfway between sound and silence. "Can I—" He stopped, started again. "Can I hold him?" "You can hold him." She placed Silas in Caleb's arms. Watched this man, this quiet, scarred, barely speaking man who'd ridden 60 miles for a piece of paper and slept on porches and taken punches and never once asked for anything. Watch him cradle her son like something he'd been given that he didn't deserve and was terrified of dropping. Silas opened his eyes. Gray, clear, creek water gray, like Caleb's. That wasn't possible, of course. The baby had Aldis's blood, not Caleb's. But in that moment, looking at this man holding this child, Eleanor thought, blood isn't what makes a father. Presence is. Choice is. Showing up is. "Caleb." "Yeah?" "He's not yours." "I know. But you're holding him like he is." Caleb looked at her, those gray eyes, steady and deep and absolutely honest. "If you'll let me," he said, "I'd like to be the man who teaches him how to be good. Not his father. I know I'm not that. But the man who's there, the one who shows up." Eleanor's throat closed. She pressed her lips together hard, because if she spoke, she'd cry, and if she cried, she might not stop. "My mother didn't have that," Caleb said quietly. "I didn't have that. Your father gave me a piece of it. One night in a flood, one act of kindness. And it was enough to make me into someone who could stand up when it mattered." He paused. "I want to give this boy more than one night, if you'll let me." "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "Yes, I'll let you." He held the baby until Silas fell asleep. Then he placed him back in Eleanor's arms with the same careful precision he did everything. Measured, intentional, like every movement was a promise. He sat on the floor beside the bed with his back against the wall. He didn't leave. She didn't ask him to. The weeks that followed changed Dry Creek the way water changes stone. Slowly, invisibly. and permanently. Eleanor was back at the forge within 10 days. Clara watched Silas while she worked. Hazel ran the bellows. Mary kept the books, such as they were, in a ledger she'd bought with her own egg money. 4 women in a forge. Dry Creek had never seen anything like it. The men didn't know what to make of it at first. Some of them resented it. Some of them laughed. But the work was good, better than good, because Eleanor drove her crew the same way she drove herself, with a perfectionism that bordered on tyranny and a standard that didn't bend for anyone. Word spread. Ranchers from 20 miles out started bringing work. A cavalry officer passing through ordered 40 horseshoes and told his regiment. A wagon train heading west stopped for repairs, and the trail boss said it was the best forge work he'd seen between St. Louis and Denver. Money came in. Not much at first, then more. Eleanor paid Clara first, then Hazel, then Mary. She paid them from the forge earnings, same as she'd pay any worker, and when Tom Briggs raised an eyebrow about his wife earning her own wages, Clara told him he could raise both eyebrows for all she cared. She was keeping the money. Tom didn't argue. He'd learned something about arguing with women who'd found their voices. Specifically, he'd learned not to. Reverend Hale preached his last sermon on a Tuesday. Nobody expected it. Tuesdays weren't sermon days. But he rang the bell and the people came. Fewer than before, and slower, but they came. Eleanor didn't go. She heard about it from Dale, who told it to her the next morning with the careful detail of a man who understood he was delivering history. Hale stood at his pulpit. He looked older, Dale said. Thinner, like something had been feeding on him from the inside. "I came to this town 12 years ago," Hale told them. "I came to save souls." I believed that's what I was doing. I believed it when I preached against Ruth Boone. I believed it when I counseled Margaret Pruitt. I believed it when I... He stopped. The congregation waited. "When I took a whip to Eleanor Whitfield," he said. "I believed I was serving God." Silence. I was serving myself. Dale said the silence after that was the kind you could drown in. Long and deep and full of things people had been thinking for months, but hadn't had the words or the courage to say. "I'm leaving Dry Creek," Hale said. "Not because I'm being driven out. Because I've done harm here that I can't undo by staying. A better man might stay and try. I'm not that man. I know what I am now, and what I am doesn't belong in a pulpit." He closed his Bible. He walked out of the church. He was on the morning coach by sunrise. No one saw him off. No one tried to stop him. And the chapel stood empty after that, because Dry Creek didn't send for another preacher. Not because they'd lost their faith, but because they'd learned, the hard way, the only way, that faith without decency is just power wearing a collar. When Eleanor heard the story, she set down her hammer and stood very still for a long time. "Good," she said finally, and went back to work. Summer burned into autumn. The heat loosened its grip. The cottonwoods turned gold along the creek. Silas grew the way babies grow, impossibly fast, filling out, finding his voice, grabbing at everything within reach. Caleb built a crib. Didn't tell Eleanor he was building it. She came home one evening and found it sitting in the cabin, handmade, sanded smooth, with rails carved from cottonwood and joints fitted so tight you couldn't slide a hair between them. "When did you learn to build furniture?" she asked. "I didn't. I learned to not quit until it looked right." "How many attempts?" "You don't want to know." She ran her hand along the rail, smooth as riverstone. "It's beautiful, Caleb." "It's a box with rails." "It's beautiful." He looked away, but she saw the flush at the back of his neck, above his collar, and she knew that this man, who barely spoke, had just said more with a piece of carved wood than most men said in a lifetime of talking. She put Silas in the crib that night. He slept without waking. First time since he was born. Eleanor lay in bed and listened to her son breathing and felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died. Safe. Not safe because a man was protecting her. Safe because she'd built it herself. The forge, the work, the women, the life. And no one could take it away. Caleb was on the porch. She could hear him out there, the creak of the bench, the soft sound of his whittling knife. Always there, never pushing, never asking for more than she was ready to give. She got up, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, opened the door. He looked up. "Can't sleep?" he asked.
Can sleep fine. Chose not to. She sat down beside him, closer than she usually did, close enough that their shoulders touched. He went still. That particular Caleb stillness, not frozen, not tense, just waiting, giving her room to decide. "I love you," she said. The whittling knife stopped. "I know you're not expecting me to say it. I know you haven't asked for it. I know you'd probably sit on this porch for another 10 years without asking. But I'm saying it because it's true, and because I'm tired of things being true and no one saying them out loud."
Caleb set the knife down, set the wood down, turned to look at her. His face in the moonlight was all angles and shadows. The scar across his throat where the rope had been. She could see it, a thin white line he never talked about. The mark of the hanging that took his voice and nearly took his life. "Eleanor," he said, her name in his damaged voice, like something precious held in rough hands. "You don't have to say it back. I know words cost you more than they cost most people." "They do." He reached over and took her hand, held it the way he'd held it that first night, careful, steady, like he was learning the shape of something he wanted to keep. But some things are worth the cost. He turned her hand over, pressed his thumb against her palm, drew a circle there, slow, deliberate, an unbroken ring. "I love you," he said. 3 words, each one pulled up from somewhere deep, somewhere damaged, somewhere that had been silent for years. "I loved you the morning I cut you down. I loved you when you picked up that hammer. I loved you when you walked into that church and told them all the truth. Caleb, I loved you before I knew your name. Because I saw you standing at that post and you weren't screaming, and I thought, that's her. That's the woman my mother would have been proud of. That's the one I'm supposed to stand next to." Eleanor's tears fell. She didn't wipe them. Let them come. They'd been waiting long enough. She leaned into him. He put his arm around her, gently, avoiding the scars on her back that would never fully fade. And she rested her head against his shoulder and breathed him in. Wood smoke and leather, and something underneath that was just him, just Caleb, this man who'd ridden out of nowhere and changed everything by doing almost nothing except showing up and staying. "Marry me," he said. She lifted her head. "What?" "Marry me. Not because you need to, not because the town expects it. Because I want to wake up every morning knowing you chose me. And I want Silas to grow up knowing what it looks like when 2 people choose each other on purpose." "You're proposing to me on a porch in the dark." "I don't have a ring." "I'm a blacksmith, Caleb. I'll make my own ring." "Is that a yes?" She put her hand on his face. Rough jaw, warm skin, gray eyes watching her like she was the whole world narrowed down to a single point. "That's a yes." He kissed her, or she kissed him. It didn't matter who started it. What mattered was that it happened, slow and careful and full of everything they'd both been carrying. And when it ended, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. "Your mother would have liked me," Eleanor said. "My mother would have put you to work." "I'd have let her." Inside the cabin, Silas stirred in his crib and made a small sound, not a cry, just a murmur, the sound of a baby dreaming. They listened to it together. 2 years later, the forge employed 11 women, widows, abandoned wives, young girls with nowhere to go. They came from as far as Wichita, following a story that traveled the territory like wind across grass. The story of a woman in Dry Creek who'd been whipped at a church post and built an empire from iron. Eleanor didn't call it an empire. She called it work. But the sign above the door had changed. It no longer read Whitfield Iron Works. It read Whitfield and Boone. Because Caleb had earned his name beside hers the same way he earned everything, quietly, steadily, by showing up every single day and doing what needed doing without being asked. Silas took his first steps in the forge, walked from the anvil to the quenching barrel on legs that wobbled like a new colt. And when he reached the barrel, he slapped it with both hands and laughed. Caleb caught him before he fell. Eleanor watched from the doorway, and she thought about her father, Henry Whitfield, who'd walked 4 miles in the snow for a stranger, who'd died at his anvil with a hammer in his hand, who'd paid off a banknote 18 months early because he wanted his daughter to be free.
"Thank you, Daddy,"
she whispered. The hammer rang, the fire burned, the women worked. On a spring morning when the cottonwoods were blooming, Eleanor forged one final piece. Not a tool, not a horseshoe, not a hinge. A circle, an iron ring, closed and unbroken, hammered from a single bar of stock without a weld or a seam. She worked it for 2 days, heated it and shaped it and quenched it and heated it again until it sang under her hammer, until the metal was perfect, until the ring was round and smooth and whole. She hung it above the forge door. Caleb watched her do it, Silas on his hip, the boy grabbing at his collar. "What's it mean?" Caleb asked. Eleanor stepped back and looked at it, the ring, black iron against the weathered wood, catching the morning light. "It means pain doesn't get the last word," she said. "It means you can take everything from a woman, her dignity, her skin, her peace, and she can still build something unbreakable. That's a lot for one ring. It's a lot for one woman, too. But here we are." He smiled, that rare, full Caleb Boone smile that she'd seen maybe a dozen times in all the months she'd known him. The one that started slow and took over his whole face and made his gray eyes warm. "Here we are," he said. Silas reached for the ring. Couldn't reach it. Reached again. Laughed. Eleanor took him from Caleb's arms, held him up high so his small fingers could touch the iron. "Feel that?" she said. "Your grandfather made the first fire in this forge. Your mama kept it burning. And someday, if you want to, and only if you want to, you'll carry it forward." Silas grabbed the ring with both hands, held on tight. He didn't let go. Years from then, people passing through Dry Creek would see that ring above the forge door and ask about it. The women inside would tell the story, each one a little different, each one true in its own way, about a woman who was whipped at a church post and didn't scream. About a cowboy who untied the rope without a word. About a forge that almost burned, and a town that almost broke. And a family that was built, not from blood, but from stubbornness and iron, and the simple, radical act of showing up. The story always ended the same way. They tried to shame her, but she built something louder than shame. She built something that lasted. And the ring above the door, unbroken, unbent, forged in fire, proved it.